I'm going to show you now how to complete your ear training drills. Now, if you click on the Assignments tab, you'll see all of the units that are available for the entire course. There are a total of 5 units. So then if you click on the first tab here, it'll open up the assignments for the first unit. And what you're going to see is ear training drill number 1. So you've got some instructions here. I'm going to go ahead and click here to begin. Make sure you read the instructions. I'm going to go over them with you right now. But I want to show you how the instructions are also embedded within the actual assignment. Depending on how fast your internet connection is, this may go slower or faster. If you have a really slow internet connection, you might want to use the university's computers to complete these drills. Alright, so if we click on instructions, it tells you that the drill is testing your ability to compare 2 chords. In ear training drill number 1, there are only 2 chords, which means there are only 2 possible answers for each question. So the 2 chords you're going to be identifying at first are the major and the minor triad, these first 2 options here. You won't be selecting diminished or augmented triad. It says right here in the instructions, do not select augmented or diminished. You'll get it wrong. Now remember, this is a participation grade, so all you have to do is complete the assignment. But if you really want to develop your ear and get the most out of this course, then you can actually go through and complete these drills no more than 5 times a day, because you don't want to strain your ear too much. You want to have a very casual relationship with developing your ear. It's not something you can force or cram. Developing your ear just takes time. But if you complete the drill, you'll get full credit. So you're going to hear 2 chords played. It's either going to be a major followed by a minor chord or a minor followed by a major chord. And what this is doing is it's allowing you to compare the 2 chords, because otherwise if I just play major or minor chords for you, it's much harder to determine what you're actually listening to. So by giving you a comparison, another chord to compare the example to, it gives you sort of they're like training wheels to allow you to figure out what these chords sound like, at least for the first ear training drill. So one of the ways you can tell the difference between a major triad and a minor triad is there are 3 notes in each one of those triads. It's why it's called a triad. The key word being tri, 3. So the major triad and the minor triad share 2 notes. The bottom and the top note of a major and a minor triad that are starting on the same bass pitch are going to be exactly the same. It's only the middle note that changes. And the way it changes is when you move from a major to a minor triad, the minor triad, the middle note of the minor triad, is going to be just a little bit lower than the major triad. So let's listen to this first example, and I'm going to answer the first question for you. But keep in mind, these drills pull from a pool of questions. There's something like 200 questions for the first drill. A lot of these drills have up to 800 possible questions they can pull from. So every time you take this drill, you'll get a different set of questions. So your answer number 1 might not be the same as the one that I'm going to play right now. All right, so let's go ahead and press play. Listen to the first chord and then the second. Here's your first chord, and here comes the second. So what you heard was 2 triads. They were played first melodically and then harmonically. So remember, melodically is when the notes of the triad are broken up so you can hear each individual note played all by itself. Harmonically is what happens when you play all 3 notes together at the same time. So listen to that again so you can hear the difference between the melodic and harmonic pitches. Harmonic, and then here's melodic, harmonic. Alright, so now you kind of get how this works. There's 2 chords in there. They're just played melodically and harmonically. Listen for the middle note from the first triad and see how it changes from the first triad to the second triad. Does the note move up when it goes to the second triad, or does it go down? Does it become lower? If it becomes higher, then that means what you're hearing is a minor triad for the first triad, because in order for the middle note to go up, it has to start at a minor triad, because remember, the major triad, the middle note is higher. If it goes down, that means your second chord is a minor triad, and so you must have started on a major triad. So let's listen to this and try and figure out the answer. So you heard your middle note. So in the second triad, that middle note, if you said it was lower, you were correct. If you can't hear that, then just listen to these examples over and over again until you can start to kind of hear the difference between the middle note of each triad. Another way to identify these chords, if you're having trouble hearing where the notes actually move, where the middle note moves. A major triad, people often say, sounds happier. It sounds more consonant. A minor triad is going to sound more subdued, more sunken in, more depressed, more sad. At the end of this lecture, after I go through all of the 5 drills that you have to complete, I'm going to go to the piano and you'll be able to see me, and I'm going to talk to you about some advanced ear training techniques. I'm going to play some examples for you and help you really try and develop your ear in this course. So the first answer should have been major, because the middle note went down when it went to the second triad. So let's go ahead and save that, and then we'll do one more of these examples. So listen for that middle note. Did the middle note go up or down when it went to the second triad? Let's do it one more time. If you said the second triad, the middle note went down, you'd be correct. This is also a major triad because the first chord moves down into the second chord. Let's do one more. So did that middle note move up or down? Listen one more time. If you said it moved up when it went to the second triad, you would be correct. Which means, since it's moving up, since the second triad was higher, the middle note was higher than the middle note of the first triad, that means the first triad has to be minor. So you select minor and save your answer. Alright, so we're going to go on to ear train drill number 2. Now, this drill is a little more complicated. You don't get to compare on this one. So just do your best. Try and listen for the quality of the triad. Now, if you had no problem passing ear training drill number 1, that means you probably can fairly easily hear the difference between a major and a minor triad. If you had difficulty, hopefully you kept practicing so that when you got to ear training drill number 2, or when you get to ear training drill number 2, it's a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to play the triad. Again, if you look at the instructions, you have to identify major and minor chords. Don't select augmented or diminished. You're still only working on major and minor chords in Unit 2. So let's go ahead and play this and see if you can identify whether it's major or minor. And if you get really good at this, you can start to break the notes apart. So you may be guessing a little bit, but what I suggest you do on these is to take your best guess. This happened to be a major triad. So listen to that chord, select your answer, save it, complete the entire quiz, and then I'm going to show you how you can check your answers to see if you got it right or wrong. So listen to that again. This one is also a major triad. So if you said major, you got it right. How about this one? So that one sounds a little bit sadder than the other two. So if you said minor, you are correct. So let's save the answer. I'm going to intentionally get one wrong now. Okay, so that's a major triad, but I'm going to go ahead and select minor, save my answer, and then I'm going to go ahead and submit this for a grade. So what will happen is you see I selected minor triad for question 4. Well, in this particular drill, you know it's either going to be major or minor. So you know the answer here was major, but you selected minor. So listen to it a few times. Does that sound like a minor triad? Go back and find a minor triad so you can hear what a minor triad sounds like, and then go back to this one and so you can compare them. Hear how this one sounds more consonant, more happy. This one sounds more depressed, a little bit sadder. And then you can start playing your own chord progression if you really want to get creative. So you can use this to check your answers. If you got any of them wrong, I recommend you just play those intervals and compare it with one of the other intervals so you can start to hear the difference. You can ignore the comment at the top there that says you must score 35% or higher. You just have to complete the drill. Even if you only get one answer right, you'll get full points for that. All right, so let's go on to ear training drill number 3. So we've been working on chords up until Unit 3. In Unit 3, you're going to start to identify intervals. So chords consist of 3 notes. An interval consists of only 2. Now, the nice thing about the intervals is that you're only going to hear them played melodically. There won't be any harmonic intervals played here, except in ear training drill number 3. I stand corrected. So read the instructions here. The drill tests your ability to compare the perfect fifth and the major third. When you listen to the audio, you're going to hear a total of 2 intervals, so they do get played in both the melodic and harmonic form. So the first interval is either going to be a perfect fifth or a major third. If the first interval is a perfect fifth, that means the second interval will always be a major third. If the first interval is a major third, that means the second interval will always be a perfect fifth. So how do you tell the difference between a perfect fifth and a major third? These intervals all start on the same note. So a perfect fifth, because 5 is bigger than 3, you know that a perfect fifth is going to be the larger interval. So if the first interval is larger than the second, then the first interval has to be a perfect fifth. If the first interval is smaller than the second, then the first interval has to be a major third, because the only 2 intervals here are perfect fifth and major third. Again, do not select perfect fourth or minor third. Those answers are incorrect. None of these in drill number 3 will be a perfect fourth or a minor third. So let's go ahead and play this first example so you can hear it. So listen to that again. Is the first interval smaller or larger than the second interval? Notice they both start on the same note. Okay, one more time. Your first interval, melodically, second interval. And now one more time, I'm not going to talk this time, just concentrate on the interval, try and figure out which one is larger. If you said the second interval was larger, you were correct, which means if the second interval is the largest interval, the first interval has to be the smaller one. That means the first interval is a major third. So let's save our answer and go on to another one. Listen again. One more time. Which interval is larger? It may take you a couple times to hear these. If you said the first interval was larger, you'd be correct. Now there's another way to do this too. I don't really like the concept of trying to use tricks to identify intervals because ultimately tricks are just tricks. It doesn't really develop your ear. What's the better option, and this goes for the triads too, is to learn to identify the sound of these intervals by their quality. So a perfect fifth has a very open quality, which I'm going to talk about at the end of this, when I actually give you your little tutorial on how to identify intervals. A major third sounds grittier. It has more substance. It sounds more, it's still consonant, but it's getting a little grittier and having more friction between the notes. It has a stronger presence. So you can learn to identify intervals based on their consonance and dissonance level. And over time, you'll start to recognize a perfect fifth as having this certain character about it. So what you're really trying to do when developing the ear is trying to get to know the individual characteristics of the notes that you are listening to. They all have their own characteristics, just like your friends have different personalities. Intervals have a personality. If I play a perfect fifth at the top of the keyboard or the bottom of the keyboard, it's still going to have that same open perfect fifth quality. So let's go and do one more. Try and listen just for the quality. The more open sounding interval will be the perfect fifth. The more close together interval that has a little bit more color to it, because the more dissonant they actually become a little more colorful. And the more colorful interval is going to be the major third. So try and think of it that way. You hear how that second interval just sounds a little bit more robust? Like it's got more energy to it almost? One more time. At first interval, it almost sounds dull. It's so consonant, it's almost uninteresting to listen to. It's almost like those two notes are the same note. They're very close. In the overtone series, those notes are really close together. And once you learn about the overtone series, you know what I'm talking about. But because the perfect fifth is so close to the fundamental of the overtone series, it doesn't have a lot of resistance from any of the other overtones. It's in its own space and it's just very clear and consonant sounding. The major third, on the other hand, occurs further on in the overtone series, and so it's interfering more with some of the other pitches that are around it. It's starting to get muddled, so that gives it a more robust, dynamic sound almost. So listen to the major third. You hear how it just seems a little stronger? Now, these two intervals are not being played any differently. They're being played with the exact same weight and attack. The only difference is that the perfect fifth is a perfect fifth, and a major third has more friction because of its position in the overtone series. So the major third sounds, you could even say, a little more energetic than the perfect fifth. It just feels like it's more vibrant. So listen one more time. Perfect fifth is open and clear. Major third is more closed and energetic. And it really comes through when they're played harmonically. So if you said perfect fifth for the first one, you would be right. So that's ear training drill number 3. Let's go ahead and see what awaits us on ear training drill number 4. And I don't have these all memorized because there's so many different sections of this. They all have different methods of laying out the ear training drills. So let's go ahead and click to begin. Looks like this one will be using the perfect fourth and the minor third. Or no, the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. You can always check the instructions once it loads up. So listen to the audio recording and identify the first interval set that is played. The first interval is played melodically and then harmonically, then the second interval is played melodically and harmonically. But what intervals are played? Professor Yore. Click on instructions and it will tell you. You'll hear a total of 2 intervals. For this drill, the first interval will be either a perfect fifth or a perfect fourth. So again, the perfect fifth, 5 is larger than 4. So the perfect fifth is going to be a larger interval. The perfect fourth is going to be smaller. Now in the overtone series, the first overtone you have in the overtone series, at this point you should, in Unit 4, you know about the overtone series. You should by now. So the first interval in the overtone series is an octave, a perfect octave. And all that is a doubling of the frequency of the fundamental note. So an octave is the most transparent sounding interval we have next to the unison. The unison is just, it is the same exact interval, so it's basically invisible when you play it again. But you play an octave, that's our most transparent interval. The second most transparent interval would be the perfect fifth, because the perfect fifth, there's a perfect fifth after the octave. If you have the lowest note is C in the overtone series, your first overtone is going to be the C an octave above, and then you have a G, which is a perfect fifth above C. So then you go up to the next overtone, you go from G back to C again, G, A, B, C is 4 notes. There's your perfect fourth. So the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth are both going to be very consonant intervals, but the perfect fifth is going to be just a little bit more consonant than the perfect fourth. So this is actually a very hard drill because the fourth and the fifth sound very similar. So you've got 2 options for doing this. You can either listen for the interval that is not as wide, the interval that is smaller, and if you find the smaller interval, you know that's your perfect fourth. Or you can try and do it the more reliable way in the long term, which is to listen for the character. So let's go ahead and see what we're dealing with for the first one here. All right, so listen to that one more time. Try and figure out the answer before I tell you. Which interval, when played harmonically, sounds like it's a little bit more colorful, a little more energetic? The first or the second one? If you said the second one, you'd be right. If you're not hearing that, listen to this several more times and see if you can start to hear the difference. I'm going to play this example 5 times. I want you to listen each time to the 2 intervals that are being played. The second interval, and of course I'm giving you a suggestion here which is going to make you hear, but that's fine. The second interval is more energetic, it's less transparent than the first one. I want you to listen for how it's less transparent than the first one. Open. More robust, more energetic. The fourth almost feels like it has more fight to it. It's a stronger interval in a lot of ways. Now you're going to hear the perfect fifth is one of the strongest intervals in music, and it really is for when we create chord progressions and other topics that are beyond the scope of this course. But when I say the perfect fourth is a stronger interval, just listen to this one more time, and then I'll explain what I mean. The perfect fourth is stronger because it has more dissonance than the perfect fifth. Because it has more dissonance, it stands out more. And the more dissonant intervals that you have, the more they're going to have a certain clash. And the more dissonant intervals almost have more character than the more consonant intervals. The consonant intervals, they just kind of sit in the back. Nobody really notices them. They're pleasant. They don't really cause any problems. They're just relaxed. The more consonant intervals are a little bit more rowdy almost. They've got more conflicts happening with their frequencies. So it's creating a stronger sound. So that is ear training drill number 4. You have to identify between the fifth and the fourth. And then finally, ear training drill number 5. Probably the hardest ear training drill you'll do is ear training drill number 2. But here's ear training drill number 5. Again, you're going to hear 2 sets of intervals. So the first one is going to be a major third or a minor third. So you've only got 2 intervals to identify in this one as well, major third or minor third. So again, the major third is going to sound more consonant than the minor third. The major third is also going to be larger than the minor third. So you can listen for either option. Listen for the larger interval or the more consonant interval. So let's go ahead and listen and see if we can identify number 1. Listen again. And by the way, the major third is more consonant than the minor third, and it occurs early in the overtone series than the minor third. You've seen the pattern here. The intervals that occur early on in the overtone series are the most consonant intervals. As you go further on the overtone series, the more remote tones become more dissonant. So let's listen to this one more time, and then I'm going to give you the answer. Okay, so if you said the first one was a major third, you would be correct. So that's it. Those are your 5 ear training drills. You can actually complete them all in the first week if you're in the summer session. I allow you to just go at your own pace because this course moves quickly. If you're in one of the full term sessions, then you have to complete it along with the class. That's one of the benefits of taking it in summer school, but summer school is such an intense program, there's not a whole lot of time to waste. So this allows you to concentrate on the assignments that you're having more trouble with. So now, this video is going to switch over to me sitting in front of a piano, and I'm going to give you some additional tips to help you develop your ear. The purpose of this lecture is to help you develop the skills necessary to do well on the ear training drills that are part of the Musical Core website. Now, if you're a non-music major and you've never played an instrument and you've never done any ear training, then these concepts can be really hard to absorb and learn at first. Developing the ear is not something that you can cram for, and if you're taking this during a summer session, it makes the task of actually developing your ear all the more difficult, because the only way to really develop your ear is through steady, consistent practice. You need to practice every day. It's not something that you can simply cram for at the end of a semester and suddenly do really well on a final ear training exam. Now the good news is if you're not a music major, then you don't have to take an ear training exam. Only the music majors have to take an ear training exam, or more specifically, the people that are enrolled in the 102 course. But I'm going to give you some tips. I'm going to introduce you to some of the basic components that you're going to have to identify in this course. And I'm going to give you some methods that you can use to try and develop your ear if that's something that you want to do. But remember that ear training grade is participation based for the Music 101 students. All you have to do is complete the exercises, and your instructor will eventually change your grade so that you get the full participation points for completing the exercise. So one of the first exercises in ear training drill number 1, you're going to have to identify the difference between a major triad and a minor triad. Now a major triad is going to have a really consonant sound. It's going to sound really open. A lot of people think it sounds happy. So here's a major triad. You can hear how there's not much friction between the notes. Now when I talk about consonance or dissonance, I mean this open sound, like this. That's a very consonant interval. It's not a chord because I'm not playing 3 notes, it's just an interval. If I were to play a dissonant interval, it would sound more like it's clashing with, the 2 notes are clashing together. That's a dissonant interval. So consonant is when it sounds really nice and open. This is an octave, it sounds almost completely transparent. Like the notes sound almost identical. Because really, the top note is just an octave higher than the bottom note. It's just twice the frequency. A fifth, the interval of a perfect fifth, in comparison, has a little more dissonance to it, but it's still considered a consonant interval. You can hear how there's more friction here in the fifth than the octave. The octave's just completely open. It almost sounds like one note. So you got your perfect octave, your perfect fifth. The next most consonant interval is the perfect fourth. It's a little bit smaller than the perfect fifth. And by smaller, I mean that the distance between the bottom and the top note is not as great. So here is a perfect fourth. You can hear it's very subtle, but if I play a fifth, that's consonant. A fourth is also consonant, but the fourth just has a little more grittiness to it. It's starting to become a little more dissonant. Now, if I separate these intervals so that you can hear them individually, here's your octave. That's 2 notes. If I play them together, they sound very consonant, right? The fifth, if I separate those intervals, if I separate that interval into 2 notes, now you can hear the individual 2 notes. You can hear the 2 notes that are making up that consonant interval. Now if I play a fourth, you can play those notes what we call harmonically, which is when you play them together, or melodically, when you separate them into individual pitches, one after another. That's a melodic example of a perfect fourth. So then the intervals get more dissonant as you go. Now for the Music 101 class, the only intervals you have to identify are the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth, the major third, and the minor third. Now if we separate these intervals that I'm playing harmonically into melodic intervals, which is the way the drills will play them, then you can hear the individual pitches. That's a fifth. It's larger than a fourth. You can hear how the fifth is just a little bit higher. Fifth, fourth comes down a little. Now the fourth, we know it's smaller than the fifth now. The perfect fourth is larger than the major third. So here's the major third. Here's your fourth, and here's your third. So if you were comparing two intervals, if I asked you to identify whether this was a fourth or a third, and I play those two intervals one after another, you should be able to hear that the second interval is smaller than the first interval. So here's an example. Here's a perfect fourth. Now I'm playing together. And here's a major third. So when you get to the interval portion of your ear training in this course, there's a bunch of intervals going on right now. But when you get to the interval portion of your course, what you're going to have at first is you're going to have two intervals that you compare. Basically what you're listening for is which interval is larger, the first interval or the second. And then the instructions will tell you what two intervals are being played, so you can select whether or not you're hearing a perfect fourth or a major third, or it might be a perfect fifth and a perfect fourth. So that's all you're doing for the interval ear training. You're just trying to listen to hear which interval is larger in the set. And then eventually, as you progress through the course, I'm going to ask you to identify intervals just by themselves. All you'll hear is a melodic interval. I might play something like this. And listening to that, the idea is if you practice these drills enough, you'll begin to recognize that that is the sound of a perfect fifth. Now, what a lot of people do when they try and identify intervals is they'll use a famous melody to try and identify an interval. Like for instance, if you have a doorbell, one of those older doorbells that plays those tones, the first two tones of a doorbell is actually a major third. And if you have a dog that's used to hearing that, then your dog will actually probably start barking if you play those on the piano. So if you knew that tone, that melody, you might recall your doorbell to help you identify the interval that you're hearing. So this is one way to do it. There are songs, there's lots of things on the internet that tell you a perfect fifth is this song, a perfect fourth is Here Comes the Bride. They've got songs for the major third, the minor third, all the intervals we have, there's a song for it, and they'll use the first two notes of that melody to help you learn these tones. But that's not the best way to really develop a solid foundation and the ability to instantly recognize these intervals. The best way to learn your intervals is to relax and just listen to the quality of the interval. Just listen to that fifth. It sounds really open. That's a fifth too. These are all fifths that I'm playing right now. So these are all perfect fifths. They all have the same basic open quality to them. Perfect fourth is going to sound a little more robust. Here's a perfect fourth. Here's another fourth. Here's another fourth. Got another one up here. So one way you can identify these intervals is to just play a perfect fifth in various octave registers and at various points on the piano, high and low versions of it, and just listen to these intervals with the acknowledgement that I am listening to a perfect fifth right now. Over time, your brain will start to identify the sound of a perfect fifth. Because part of the problem with ear training is, we're all born, as long as we're not colorblind or have some disability that way, most of us can recognize colors because we've been taught the names for those colors. You've been listening to sounds your entire life, but nobody has told you what the names of the sounds are you're listening to. So at an older age, you suddenly have to start identifying these individual sounds, the intervals that make up our music, and that takes a while. You can't always do it immediately. Some people, all they have to do is hear an interval once or twice, be told what that interval is, and they never forget it. And then suddenly they can identify any perfect fifth they hear. That's very rare, but that might happen with you. You may find that ear training is actually really easy for you. For most of us, including myself, what you have to do is listen to these intervals over and over again and get a lot of exposure. So what these drills are designed to do is allow you to take them multiple times if you want. If you want to develop your ear, the tools are right there for you in those drills. Play those drills over and over again and keep working on them until you instantly recognize the quality of the particular component, whether it's a chord or an interval that you're trying to identify. So, the very first ear training drill asks you to identify the difference between a major triad and a minor triad. So here is a major triad. It sounds more consonant. Here is a minor triad. It sounds sadder. It sounds more dissonant. It's those first two notes, they create a dissonance. So you'll hear both of these triads played for you in the first ear training drill example. And you have to identify whether the first triad you hear is a major triad or a minor triad. If the first triad is major, you select major, save your answer, go on to the next one. If you do really well and you get all of these right, then don't bother taking it again unless you feel like you could use a little more practice. So, you've got your major triads, then you've got your minor triads, and then there's another triad that's even more dissonant than the minor triad. It's called a diminished triad. So here you may be asked to identify the difference between a major triad and a diminished triad, or a minor triad and a diminished triad. So if you get a drill like that, then you're just listening for the more dissonant interval. If you hear an augmented triad, which is actually a major triad with a higher top note, that sounds a lot like a diminished triad to a lot of students when they first start out. So here's a diminished, here's the augmented, diminished, and augmented. So the difference here is that the augmented triad actually sounds a little more open because the notes are spaced a little further apart than each individual note in the chord. So the way you identify that is by listening for the more open chord as opposed to the more closed chord. So the closed chord will be your diminished, the more open chord will be augmented. Closed, augmented. And most students are able to identify the difference between major and minor fairly well. So if you have to identify between all four, then you actually have some pretty good experience identifying major and minor during the first ear training drills, so that when you get on to some of the more advanced ones, you'll have a better chance. But again, if you're not a music major, it doesn't matter if you do extremely well on these. What matters is that you make an attempt so that you get the credit for these assignments. So when it comes to intervals, and developing your ear, really the only way to do it, and if you're taking this in a summer course, it's going to be very difficult, but the only way to do this is to practice consistently every day. But here's a few tips for you. First, you don't want to practice more than 30 minutes a day. And I would suggest if you're just starting out, no more than 10 minutes a day. Because what will happen is after a while, you won't be able to tell the difference between any interval that you play or hear. The ear is very delicate, and it gets tired very easily. So you don't want to burden it with too much information, and you can't listen harder. It doesn't work that way. You can't, through sheer force of will, identify an interval just by really trying to listen to it. The difference between a fifth and a fourth is so subtle that unless you are in a very relaxed state, you're probably not going to be able to hear the difference that clearly. You really need to be relaxed to hear intervals. And as you gain experience, it won't matter so much whether you're relaxed or whether you're stressed or whether you're playing in an ensemble. These intervals will become so familiar to you that you'll just hear them pop out all over the place. You might hear your cat meow perfect four. You might hear the treadmill hum a major second. All these different intervals are all around us. You'll hear birds sing intervals all the time. You'll hear a grandfather clock play chimes that match intervals that you know. So what happens is once you start to recognize these intervals, then you start to automatically hear them everywhere you go. If you ever had an experience where you learned about something in school and then all of a sudden you notice it everywhere around you, it's almost like the world is now trying to reinforce your teaching through commercials and other activities that you complete throughout the day. It's not necessarily that this information wasn't already being thrown at you. It's that since you were taught it and since your brain is concentrated on learning this information, you now recognize it anywhere you go. The same thing is true with interval and ear training, but it takes time. If you do not start, if you're a music major, I'm really talking to music majors right now, and anybody who wants to develop their ear. If you don't start these drills right away, at the beginning of the semester, and practice them daily as much as you can, even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes, then by the end of the semester, you will not have developed the ear you need as a musician. And if you're taking this as a survey course, the idea is to introduce you to what musicians have to go through, have to learn, the techniques and the skills that they need to be successful musicians in a program of music in a university. So this gives you an idea of what you have to expect if you decide to go into music. It's not just about playing your instruments, it's also about understanding musical concepts, and a huge part of that is developing a good ear. So just do the best you can on these drills. If you're having trouble, take these drills over and over again. If you're a music major, you should be getting 90% on every drill. If there's a drill you can't get 90% on, keep working on it until you can. Come back the next day and you're going to find that the intervals are just a little bit easier to hear. And if you do this, eventually, by the end of the semester, you should develop a very good ear. You can develop the ability to hear these basic intervals and triads by the end of the semester if you're in a full semester. If you're in the summer, it's going to be a little more difficult for you, I'll be honest. But you should be able to do this if you just put in the time.